Hi everyone. Today we are going to start with the theory of prelims 2.0 economics session. So as happened in case of other sessions related to that of theory of prelims, today we are going to discuss about some important aspects associated with the economics for prelims. Now in this session we'll be focusing on the pattern in which UPSC have asked economics question over the years, that is from 2011 to 2019, as well as we'll be discussing the focus areas, the key areas that we have to focus for the upcoming exam, that is in 2020, right? Then what are the major areas that have to be focused and as well as be studied thoroughly by you, etc. So that is with this particular session, which is going to start now. Yeah. So in this process, what we'll do is, as in case of the earlier theory of prelims, we'll also be analyzing the question paper from 2011 to 2019 in order to get a better idea related to how UPSC is asking questions from different parts or different questions. So first we are going to have a general analysis. Now here you have to understand that at an average every year UPSC is asking around 20 questions from economics in the prelims examination. So 20 question means it is 40 marks, and you know how important it is to secure this 40 marks, right? Even 2 marks is also very important when it comes to prelims, as we see that many aspirants actually lose out on prelims just because of 1 mark or even like 2 marks. So it is very important that you score maximum questions that comes from the economics portion. Now, one important aspect that you have to understand is if you are able to understand the concept, if you are able to understand how to actually prepare for economics in prelims, it will be easy for you to at least score 30 to 35 marks from this portion. It will be easy for you to score around this particular mark. Now, if you put in much effort, if you are able to, invest a lot of, your effort, you are able to, understand things, you are able to go through all the relevant materials, then I can say that it is possible for you to even score the entire 40 marks from this particular portion. Now, when it comes to nature of questions asked for prelims in economics, you have to understand that there is significant overlap when it comes to that of the government schemes that you guys usually prepare separately, right? So for every prelim, you guys prepare current affairs separately, and some of the questions that is asked in economics is also from the current affairs topic. So for that, you have to refer to the Ignite compilations on current affairs, where we have covered all important current affairs articles for prelims. Clear? So that Ignite series will be important for you to get access to all important current affairs that is required for prelims. Then another overlap is related to that of international organization, especially related to some of the reports and indexes. Clear? Then international trade is also a part of economics. As a result, it has significant overlap with that of international relations, right? The next is you have to understand that it is also having overlap with science and tech, especially when it comes to that of agricultural technology, when it comes to that of industrial technology, etc., or even the digital technology and payment technology. These are overlapping with the economic development portions that we have to prepare for prelims, right? There can be, for example, genetic engineering, right? BT cotton, BT brinjal, etc. So all these topics are also having overlap with science and tech, and some of the questions that have been asked by UPSC is already dealt under science and tech portion. So these are some of the areas that you have to understand that have overlap with that of economics. Next, you have to understand that the difficult level or the difficulty level in this economics paper usually ranges from very easy to that of some questions which is, out of the blue questions that UPSC asks, which actually is actually asked for, kind of putting that pressure on the aspirants. So those kind of questions will be there, but those type of tough questions are considerably low in numbers. So that needs to be understood as well. Clear. Now, when it comes to that of the economics portion, we can actually divide the entire portion into these four groups. Clear. So the first important group, it is macroeconomics. There we will be covering inflation, we will be covering fiscal policy, taxation, then a little bit of economic history and structure of economy. That is actually covered under the entire scheme of questions that we are going to deal. Clear? So in here, you can see that the portion of theory questions is higher to that of the current affairs or application questions. So the theoretical questions are asked at a higher level when it comes to that of the macroeconomics part. And what you require here is conceptual clarity in all important macroeconomic indicators, such as that of fiscal policy, inflation, taxation, etc. The next portion is money, banking, and finance. There again, you can see that the theory questions are comparatively higher than that of the application questions. There we'll be dealing with the monetary policy, the banking, different types of banks, as well as the financial markets. Now, next is related to that of growth and development, which constitute around like 43.8% of the questions. But at the same time, you have to understand that the number of application or current affairs questions there is very high. 81% of the questions are from current affairs part, and only 19% of the questions are theoretical in nature. So that shows that current affairs is also very important for your economics preparation. Is it clear? Now next is external sector. Again, you can see that in case of external sector, also theory questions are comparatively higher. It's like kind of 50-50, right? 47% theory and 53% application. Now there we are going to deal with balance of payment, we are going to deal with international trade, we are going to deal with international organizations, their reports, etc. And these have significant overlap with IR as well. Now when it comes to that of growth and development, these are some of the topics that you already prepare for your mains, such as that of the agriculture. Now what is development? There you have to understand about inclusive development, the components of inclusive development, right, such as that of financial inclusion, etc. You have to also understand about the growth and national income aspects, like what is national income, what is the method of calculating national income. You have to also understand about the growth. Then we have to deal with energy sector as such. Then we have to deal with the industry and infrastructure. And finally, we have some reports related to various industrial, infrastructural indexes or indices. Clear? So this is how we have to actually divide the entire question paper and the entire topics that we have to actually prepare for the economics. Now next is related to that of, we have to understand that we are going to start with that of macroeconomics. Now what is macroeconomics? What are the type of questions asked in macroeconomics? Okay, we'll be looking in detail about the type of questions, okay, as well as how you actually should prepare macroeconomics. Now, as I've already mentioned, macroeconomics consists of the inflation part, the fiscal policy part, taxation part, as well as the economic structure part. Okay. Now, first we'll start with the inflation part. Now, when it comes to that of the trend in inflation, you have to understand that in case of inflation, UPSC is asking more of theoretical questions that try to check your conceptual clarity in this particular area. So whatever your conceptual clarity or how much you have understood related to that of inflation, what is your understanding related to inflation, etc., is checked under this particular portion. Also, recently you can see that UPSC is also including certain trends from the inflation portion, such as that of what was the different types of, or what, how India's inflation rate has been doing since last 5 years or since last 10 years, etc. So those kind of trend-based current affairs questions are also coming up from the inflation part, but still you can see that a lot of questions are already asked from the theoretical conceptual portion from inflation part. Now when it comes to that of UPSC, their favorite is related to that of different indexes, that is consumer price index, wholesale price index, right? So these kind of indexes are something that UPSC actually like from this particular portion. Now moving forward, we are going to discuss some of the important questions that are asked in the inflation chapter by UPSC, or the inflation portion by UPSC for the prelims in the past 10 years. So the first question that we are going to discuss here is related to that of which is most inflationary in its effect. Now, which one of the following is most inflationary? Now, here again, we are trying to check whether you have understood the concept of inflation or not, right? So the first one is repayment of public debt. Is it leading to, or is it more inflationary? Is it inflationary in nature? Second is borrowing from public to finance a budget deficit. Third is borrowing from banks to finance a budget deficit. And finally, creating new money to finance a budget deficit. Now, out of these options, what is the correct answer? I know you guys might already know the answer. It is obviously D, that is creating new money to finance a budget. Now, all the items that are given here, for example, repayment of public debt, that will increase the amount of money available with the people, right? That will have an impact on inflation. That will actually increase inflation. That will create inflation. Borrowing from public to finance a budget deficit, again, that will lead to higher levels of inflation, right? Because we are borrowing from public to finance a budget deficit. That means we are taking money from the public and government is actually spending it in the market. That will also lead to higher levels of inflation. If government borrows from the banks and then they spend in the economy, then also there will be higher levels of money supply because government is spending in the economy. Thereby, the overall money supply in the economy will start increasing. Then you have to also understand that the final point, it is more relevant because of the fact that in all these, kind of options given here, there is, impact on two sides, right? If government is borrowing from the public to finance a budget deficit, what happens? The amount available with the public is actually reducing, right? And government is actually spending in the market and they are trying to increase the money supply. So there is a kind of a seesaw effect. On one hand, government is taking money from the public, thereby the amount available with the public reduces. And on the other hand, government is spending in the market, thereby money supply again start increasing. So that kind of a seesaw effect or that kind of a balancing effect is there, even though it causes inflation. Now, borrowing from banks also have the same impact because the amount available with the bank, they will not actually keep it with themselves, right? They are going to anyway provide loan to the private investors, the individuals for their consumption requirement, etc. But here what happens, government is taking money from them and they are actually using it for financing their budget. That means government is using it for their expenditure. Now what will happen because of that? Again, there will be a kind of a balancing effect because the amount available in the bank, they are taking, government is taking them and they are spending it. So the remaining amount available with the bank to give to private will be less. As a result, the private expenses or the private investments, the individual consumption, etc., can come down. So that will also have a balancing effect. But creating new money means there is no balancing effect, right? Government is creating new money. That means the existing money supply is not getting affected because of government expenditure. In all other cases, existing money supply available in the market is getting affected. Here, as they are creating new money, it actually introduces a lot of extra money supply in the market, which creates higher levels of inflation. So it is most inflationary in nature. Clear? So that aspect needs to be understood of the balancing act. So these kind of conceptual clarity is required in order for you to understand how exactly, or in order for you to, do these questions correctly. Okay. Now we'll move on to the second question. Now, one more thing that I want to tell you here is, it is in case of economics, you don't have to, use that complicated or complex level of logic. You have to use the simple logic that you have got from reading these particular portions from your basic books. You have to use your simple understanding about these concepts that you have acquired through attending class or reading materials, etc. You don't have to complicate it. You don't have to overthink on it. In certain other subjects, the faculties might have mentioned about, you have to actually think in different lines. You have to think deeper, etc. But here you don't have to do that. For all the conceptual questions, what we suggest is do straight line thinking. You don't have to go into, the complexities. You don't have to overthink. So ultimately what happens is you are going to end up making it wrong. So don't commit that mistake. Think in a simple manner, think in a straight line, you will get that particular answer. Now next is the rise in general level of prices may be caused by, there are options, an increase in the money supply, decrease in aggregate level of output, and increase in effective demand. Now what is the answer here? It is very simple, it is very straightforward, you don't have to think much. See, it is a very common, concept of inflation that if there is increase in money supply, what will happen? Increase in money supply will lead to higher levels of inflation, which is known as, or which is nothing but rise in general level of prices. A decrease in aggregate level of output again will lead to inflation. How? Because what happened when it comes to that of increase in, reduction in output, we have to understand that particular theory. Demand remaining the same, when the supply reduces, what happens? The prices will start increasing. This is a very basic theory that you have to understand, right? When demand remaining the same, equal means it is same. Supply reduces, it will lead to higher level of prices. Why? Because there was an equilibrium in the economy with respect to demand and supply, right? Now that equilibrium is lost and the supply have actually reduced. That means there is lower supply than the demand, right? So that will lead to, too much money or too much people following few goods. That will lead to higher prices. So that is correct. This one is also correct. And the third one, increase in effective demand. That is very straight, right? That is a very basic idea on what inflation exactly is. Higher levels of demand will automatically lead to inflation, because when too many people are following too few goods, prices will increase. So answer is 1, 2, and 3. So these are some of the basic questions that your UPSC have asked when it comes to that of the inflation question. Now next is, UPSC also have this tendency to ask questions related to terms in economics. It is not just in economics that they, take terms and ask questions, but in economics also, that number of questions that they, ask in this particular manner is comparatively high. Going forward, you will see a lot of questions in this particular nature. So when it comes to what is base effect, okay, now this is another basic topic that all of you might have read, all of you might have studied. So what is base effect? What is it? It's simple, right? It is the impact of price levels of previous year on the calculation of inflation rate. Now this question shows, or it's the key takeaway from this particular question is, you have to be thorough with the basics in economics. You have to be thorough with the concepts in economics. If you are thorough with the basics and concepts, you will be able to do fair number of questions right. And that will help you to increase your score really well in prelims. Okay. Now the fourth question, which of the following brings out the consumer price index number for industrial worker? Again, a very basic question related to that of the index. I've already mentioned that UPSC is showing more interest towards that of indexes, and lately they have started asking questions on various index also, such as consumer price index, and we know that consumer price index have different types: consumer price index rural, consumer price index urban, consumer price index combined, consumer price index agricultural labor, consumer price index industrial worker, consumer price index rural labor. So these are the different types of consumer price index. Out of it, consumer price rural, consumer price urban, consumer price combined is actually calculated by who? Now it is National Statistical Office, because CSO and NSSO is actually combined and we have National Statistical Office now. Okay, that is a current affairs. So you have to actually take this particular focus area, recent changes in calculation of inflation. Earlier CSO and NSSO used to calculate different types of indexes. Now these are combined together and we have National Statistical Office. So do read about National Statistical Office. UPSC may ask a question related to it. Okay, now here the answer is Labor Bureau, because CPI-AL, CPI-IW and CPI-RL, these are all prepared by the Labor Bureau. Clear? So that also have to be kept in mind. Now next, another two important questions related to this particular portion. One is the inflation. You have to consider the following statements and you have to say which one is correct. Okay. Now, controlling inflation in India is the responsibility of the government of India only. Now, you know what it is. It is a rotten tomato. Right? Reserve Bank of India has no role in controlling inflation. It is an extreme statement again. Right? See, this type of questions can be easily be done with your knowledge, with your basic knowledge, but I'm also, giving you idea on how UPSC is framing the question or framing the sentences or the options. Then decreased money circulation helps in controlling the inflation. Now opposite to it, increased money circulation helps in controlling the inflation. If you know the basics of inflation, that is higher levels of money supply will lead to higher levels of inflation. If you know that, you will be able to eliminate this as well. So answer is decreased money circulation helps in controlling inflation. Very simple question, right? So these are the types of questions that UPSC asks from the basic economics. You don't have to go and study about all those in-depth things that usually those people who take economics optional prepare. You have to understand the concepts only. You have to understand what is actually happening or what is the basic concept of these ideas, these macro economic indicators. You have to also connect it with whatever is happening in the contemporary times. If you are able to do that, you will surely be able to score very high marks. Now next is consider the following statements. Inflation benefits the debtors, inflation benefits the bondholders. Now which one is correct, which one is wrong? Again, the basic question. Inflation, as you already know, is good for the creditor, it is good for the debtors and it is bad for the creditors. Now, why is it bad for the creditors? As you know, when there is inflation, it will lead to reduction on value of money, right? So as a creditor, if you are giving or if you are lending money to someone, the money that you gave to that particular person, it's losing its value because of inflation. As a result, it is not good for the creditor who have given the money or who have lent the money. At the same time, it is good for someone who has borrowed the money because the value of money have actually come down. As a result, when they are returning the money, right, the absolute amount of money does not change. Because if you have taken or if you have borrowed 10,000 from a particular person, you are going to return only 10,000 to that particular person, right? But in reality, the value of money has actually come down because of inflation, right? The purchasing power of that particular money has come down because of inflation. That is why we say that value of money reduces with inflation. So here again, you have to use this particular concept. So you have to have this particular idea in your brain. That is, it is good for the debtors and it is bad for the creditors. And you have to also understand the reason why it is so. And you will easily be able to do this particular question. Now, inflation benefits the debtor. Is it correct? Yes, it is correct. Inflation benefits the bondholders. No, bondholders are nothing but they are a different form of creditors. They are actually given their money for someone to, invest, right? They have actually given their money to someone. So as a result, they are actually creditors. So it is not good for them. Is it clear? Okay. Now, when it comes to that of the case of the fiscal policy. You have to also understand some important aspects. Now we are going to deal with this particular portion of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, you have to understand that mainly the questions are currently more being asked from that of the current affairs. Now, the current affairs means it is related to that of the various trends associated with that of the fiscal policy, as well as some of the information related to that of the latest budget. So, you have to understand that when it comes to fiscal policy, the questions that UPSC asks are from the basic portions of fiscal policy as well as that of the trends as well as the budget. Clear? So you have to prepare the fiscal policy part accordingly. Now the UPSC favorites are the budget. And when you look into the questions that UPSC have asked in the previous years, you can see that many of the questions that they have asked is from the budget. And you can also see that some of the terms associated with that of the fiscal policy is also asked regularly by UPSC. Clear? So these are some of the trends, some of the aspects that you have to understand when it comes to fiscal policy. Now we look into the questions related to fiscal policy. Now in 2011, there was a question related to which of the following appropriately, describe fiscal stimulus. Now you have to answer this. Which of the following term, what is the answer for that? Now here you can see that the options given here are, it is a massive investment by government in manufacturing sector to ensure the supply of goods to meet the demand surge caused by rapid economic growth. Is it like that? Is it because of rapid economic growth? No, stimulus is that particular word. You have to understand that even if you haven't studied that, you have to take, you have to use your logic based on the terms given in the question. Stimulus means we are stimulating something, like we are actually giving a push to something. We are planning to, or we are giving that stimulating effect, or we are pushing something. Now, when we actually push, fiscal means something related to that of government expenditure. Okay, now why do we have to push government expenditure? Why are we actually using government expenditure to push something or push our economy? Is it because we have rapid economic growth? No, there is no chance. There is no logic in that, right? Now, the second option, it is an intense affirmative action of government to boost economic activity in the country. Now, that makes sense because government is planning to boost the economic activity because government is boosting the economy. Government is actually stimulating the economy to grow through fiscal stimulus. So expenditure is made to boost economic activity. Now, other options, it is very easy for you to eliminate them. It is government's intensive action on financial institutions to ensure disbursement of loans to agriculture and allied sectors. No, that is actually not required. Okay, that we actually have covered when it comes to that of priority sector lending, etc. So that has nothing to do with the fiscal stimulus. Fiscal stimulus means something related to government expenditure. Here it is related to that of the loan given by the banks or financial institutions. So it will not be a part of fiscal policy. Then it is an extreme affirmative action by government to pursue its policy of financial inclusion. Now that again you can see that when it comes to financial inclusion, it is something related to the banks. Now that does not have anything to do with government expenditure. It is related to that of the banking sector, right? It is something related to that of the monetary aspect. So that will also be wrong. So the correct answer is B. It is to boost economic activity. So when you get a question, you have to actually do a kind of an analysis of the question. Even if you don't know that particular term that is being asked, it is okay. You can actually find out the answer if you are able to use the logic. If you know what fiscal policy is, what fiscal means, then you can easily get to the answer, right? Now the next question. In India, deficit financing is used for raising resources for. Now, deficit financing means government is spending more than what they get. That is deficit financing, right? If they want to spend more, they will have to take loan, right? So that is meant by deficit financing. So government is borrowing and government is spending because government's income is
lower than that of their expenditure. Now, why do government do that? Is it for economic development? Makes sense, right? Because in order to have economic development, government will go for deficit financing. Now, is it redemption of public debt? Does government do that? Now, government do deficit financing in order to end their public debt? No. Government is borrowing. Now, do you think that government will borrow from people and then they will try to give some money that they have earlier purchased or taken from the people? No, that is not possible, right? Then adjusting the balance of payments. Balance of payments means it is something related to that of the international transaction. So it has nothing to do with deficit financing. Government did not have to actually borrow to actually spend. Reducing foreign debt, again, it is related to that of the external sector. It is related to that of international aspect. So government will never borrow or go for deficit financing. The government will not go for higher levels of expenditure in order to just meet their debt, because the debt can stay there, right? Debt will actually be there. They can actually pay it off in the coming years also. Now, whenever government is going for deficit financing, the primary objective, the major objective of it is to bring economic development. That is also a very simple concept. Now, going through these questions, you will get this idea that economics is actually comparatively easy when it comes to that of the level of questions that UPSC asks from economics. Now, next is Financial Stability and Development Council. Now, this is a current affairs question. I've already mentioned that, like lately UPSC, now this question is from 2016. Lately UPSC is asking questions related to current affairs, some important councils that have actually come up in the news, right? So what is Financial Stability and Development Council? It is an organ of Niti Aayog. It is headed by Union Finance Minister. It monitors macro-prudential supervision of economy. Now, the first statement, it is an organ of Niti Aayog. Will it be correct? There is very less chance. Okay. Why? Because Financial Stability and Development Council means it is something related to that of the government fiscal, government finances, right? So that kind of activity will not be done by Niti Aayog, because Niti Aayog is a think tank. Their purpose is to help government in formulating policies. They are not something that is related to that of the fiscal aspect. Clear? So that can be easily be, eliminated. So if you eliminate the first statement, then 3 only, 2 and 3. Now the important question that comes here is whether 2 is correct or not. Now for that you have to actually read about this. Otherwise it will be a wild guess that you're going to take. So the key takeaway here is read about important institutions, important organizations that actually come up in the news. That will actually help you in making some questions correct. Now you cannot predict what kind of groups or what kind of organizations or institutions may be asked. But one thing is sure, something that has come up in the news will be taken up by the UPSC in majority of the cases. Okay, so in that manner, your probability of making these kind of questions right will increase when you have referred to the current affairs materials properly. Is it clear? Okay. Now next is another question from 2016. Now here it is an application question. It is a conceptual question. Whether you know the concept or not is being checked here in this kind of question. There has been a persistent deficit budget year after year, which action or actions of the following can be taken by government to reduce the deficit. Now, what are the different types of actions? Reducing revenue expenditure. Now, by reducing revenue expenditure, government's fiscal deficit can be reduced, right? So you have to understand what is fiscal deficit here, because the deficit budget means it is like fiscal deficit itself. So fiscal deficit means it is revenue expenditure plus capital expenditure, right? Minus revenue receipts plus non-debt creating capital receipt. I'm not going to explain each and every item because these are some of the basic aspects that you guys have already studied. So if you know this particular thing, this particular formula, revenue expenditure plus capital expenditure minus revenue receipts plus non-debt creating capital receipts. You will be able to do this very easily. Now, in order to reduce deficit, what you have to do? Either you have to reduce the expenditure side, right? You have to reduce, you have to make it negative, or you have to reduce the expenditure side, or you have to increase the receipt side. Okay, so on that basis, you have to understand this. Now, reducing revenue expenditure, that means you are reducing revenue expenditure, so that will be right. Now, next is introducing new welfare schemes. Now, when government is introducing new welfare scheme, that means government's expenditure is going to increase, right? Because in order to do all the welfare schemes, government will have to spend. That is an expenditure. So if government increases the expenditure, the deficit is not going to reduce. Instead, the deficit is going to increase, right? So that will be wrong. Now, rationalizing subsidies. Now, rationalizing subsidy means government is going to reduce. Rationalize means they are going to reduce the subsidies. So when government reduce subsidy, the revenue expenditure will come down because subsidies mostly comes under the revenue expenditure. So revenue expenditure is coming down. So here again, expenditure is coming down. So that will be right. Now, reducing import duty. Now, import duty means it is a revenue receipt for the government, right? Import duty, that is, it is a tax. Now, if government reduce import duty, what happened? Government's revenue is coming down. We have already mentioned that in order to reduce deficit, government will have to increase the revenue. Now, here it is opposite. By reducing the import duty, government is reducing their revenue. So that will be wrong. So in this manner, if these kind of questions come, you can draw this particular equation and you can, mark up the statements or options given here in this particular manner. That will give you a better clarity when solving these type of questions. And you have got the answer, that is 1 and 3. Simple, right? It's very simple to do these kind of things. Now next, we are going to discuss about another type of question, that is which of the following are non-plan expenditure. Now, government have taken away the distinction between plan expenditure and non-plan expenditure. Now, plan expenditure and non-plan expenditure means plan expenditures are those expenditures that are incurred on the basis of the 5-year plan. As 5-year plan is also taken away, this kind of distinction between plan expenditure and non-plan expenditure is also taken away by the government. So whatever expenses are coming to the government based on the 5-year plans created, that are planned expenditure. And those expenditure that are not part of the plan, but are other types of expenditure that is carried out by the government from year to year are non-plan expenditure. Now here, the options given here are, now defense expenditure. Now defense, does it become part of our 5-year plans? Usually not. Right? 5-year plans are mostly focusing on how to achieve economic growth. So that mostly deals with the infrastructural development aspect, the various sectors such as the industrial development, right, agricultural development, all those things are actually emphasized when it comes to that of the 5-year plan. So defense expenditure does not become part of our 5-year plans. So as a result, it is an example of non-plan expenditure. Interest payment, is it a part of our plan, 5-year plans? Do we actually mention about these are the type of investments that, or these are the type of payments that we are going to make when it comes to that of interests? No, that is not there. Salaries and pensions, are they part of 5-year plan? No, because 5-year plan is mostly something that is prepared to have a particular vision for the next 5 years. It is a particular vision that points out like on whichever sectors that we have to show improvement, on whichever sectors that we have to actually focus on, what kind of investments that we have to do in those kind of sectors, etc. Now their salaries and pensions does not have any role. Subsidies again falls in the same category, right? So think from that particular perspective, like plan means it is created for the growth, right? For the next 5 years, what are the different types of growth or what kind of growth do we require? Now, the expenditures given here does not fall under that particular plan category, right? It can be thought from your very logic that you have. So as a result, here, When it comes to that of example of or which among the following are covered under non-plan expenditure, the answer is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All the items given here are non-plan expenditures. Now next is, which of the following is or are included in the capital budget of the government? Now, what is capital budget? Again, you have to understand capital budget means something that is related to capital receipts or capital expenditure. You have to understand what the concept of capital receipt and capital expenditure is. Now, expenditure on acquisition of assets, is it part of capital expenditure? Yes, right? Because capital expenditure means something, some expenditure or a kind of an expenditure which leads to creation of assets or reduction in liabilities. So here they are talking about creation of assets. So as a result, here it becomes part of capital expenditure. As a result, it becomes part of capital budget. Now, loans received from the foreign government. Now, it is something that is received. So it is a receipt, right? Receipt means something we receive. Now, what is capital receipt? It is something that reduces the asset or increases the liability, right? All those receipts that leads to reduction in asset and increase in liability is known as capital receipt. Now, loans received from foreign government is actually increasing the liability. As a result, what is it? It is capital receipt. So it is also part of capital budget, right? Clear? I guess it's clear to you. So capital receipt and capital expenditure should be understood. I'll just draw this thing here as well. Capital expenditure means asset is increasing and liabilities are decreasing. So in the first case, it is asset increase. In the second case, liability is increasing. Now in the third stage or statement, loans and advances granted to the states and union territories. Now when it comes to that of the loans and advances, you have to understand that government is spending, right? But loan given by the government is an asset for the government, right? Because whenever we are borrowing, our liability increases. Whenever we are lending, our asset is increasing. As a result, here asset increase. So it is an example of capital expenditure. So answer is 1, 2, and 3. Is it clear? Okay. So next we are going to discuss about the next question. So every time when you mention about the capital receipt, capital expenditure, revenue expenditure, and revenue receipt, etc., do try to have this kind of equations and things with you. See, these are not mathematical problems, but if you have this, if you have slight issues in picking this up very easily, instead of getting confused by thinking it without having any equation, it's better that you have some equation, you draw it, you actually try to connect with that particular equation in the question paper itself. That will be better for you. Okay, so do try to do that. Then next is, there has been persistent deficit budget year after year. Which of the following sections can be taken by the government, or actions can be taken by the government to reduce the deficit? It is asked in 2015, and we have discussed another question in 2016 of the same nature. Just imagine UPSC is repeating certain type of concepts, that too in the consecutive years. And look at the options that they have given. Reducing revenue expenditure, introducing new welfare scheme, rationalizing subsidy. The only change here is expanding industries. Remaining everything is same. And they have also slightly changed the options. There is no much change also. They have just changed the order of the options. Here, one only is A, here one only is C. Right? So this is how UPSC is asking question. Strange, right? So you might have already seen such kind of questions that is repeated in UPSC prelims paper. Now here, when it comes to that of the answer, I don't have to repeat the entire thing again. You know that welfare schemes is wrong, revenue expenditure is right, rationalization of subsidies right. Expanding industries, you may get confused because you might think expanding industries means, see, this is where I tell you that you don't have to make things complicated. You might think, okay, when there is expansion in industries, what will happen? The tax revenues will coming into for the government. as a result of tax revenue, government's deficit will start reduce, right? So in that manner, when you start thinking about that, you will think that fourth one will also be right. And you look for the options. There is 1, 3, and 4. There is nothing, there is no option like that. And some people, what they do is they do something really strange. As they don't see that particular 1, 3, 4 option, they think that 2 will also be correct and they will go for D. Now, don't do that kind of stupid things. Just imagine it is asking that how they can reduce the deficit, right? Expanding industries doesn't mean that government will have to reduce or government will be able to reduce the deficit, because first thing is expanding industries means government will have to spend for infrastructure. That means government's investments, government's expenditure will increase. Expanding industries does not happen just like that. Government say, if suppose government tomorrow gives a notice like all businesses are requested to start industries in a particular area, will the industries do that? No. If the industries will have to invest, government will have to spend on infrastructure there. Government will have to, arrange things for them. It should actually have a proper or set a proper environment for the businesses to invest there. Now, for those things, government will have to do more expenses or expenditure. Now, that will increase expenditure in the short term. In the long term, it may or may not lead to increase in revenue. So don't complicate things, don't overthink. Just take things in that particular straight line. Just keep things simple. Okay, so answer is again 1 and 3. Now next is, why is Government of India disinvesting its equity in the central public sector enterprises? This is an old question. Now if the same question is asked now, the answer will actually change. But at that time, government was actually doing token disinvestments instead of carrying out what? Strategic disinvestments. There is a shift in the disinvestment policy by the government, right? You already know that. With the arrival of the new government, especially in the second term, in the very first budget, it was mentioned by our Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman that government is going for more strategic disinvestment, whereby they are going to sell off their equity in central public sector undertakings, and they are going to sell some of them 100%. Right. So the entire equity of government will be sold. Clear. But at that time, mostly token disinvestments, that means investments which does not lead to change in management control, took place. And government intends to use the revenue earned from the disinvestment mainly to pay back the external debt? No, because the external debt that the government have is very less. India is having comparatively less external debt. Okay, so that will be wrong. And also you have to understand that mostly government, if they are selling these kind of public sector undertakings, they will be using that amount for the developmental activities, right? So that will, by using your logic itself, you can say that that is wrong. The government no longer intends to retain management control. That is again wrong, considering it is 2011. But now, things have actually changed. The first statement will stand or it will be wrong even if it is asked in 2020. But the second statement will be correct, because government no longer intends to retain management control, because government is going for more and more strategic disinvestments. But at that time, the answer was so. The focus area here is you have to study about this investment, especially because of the fact that the new government have made it clear that their agenda or their main focus will be on disinvestment. Now, the thing is, the last prelims, that was 2019 prelims, took place in June 2nd, I guess. At that time, the budget of new government was not ready. It was only ready by July, right? And that particular budget was out only in July. So what will happen here is, after that particular shift in the disinvestment policy, UPSC did not get any chance to ask a question related to it. So you can expect a question from disinvestment part. That is a focus area. Please note down. Now next is a trend based question. Now 2017. Earlier, we have already mentioned that now UPSC is going more towards that of the trend-based questions given from the fiscal policy chapters. Tax revenue as a percentage of GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. Fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. Now, we have made it clear that it is only very rarely that steadily increase and steadily decrease become wrong. And even in those cases, you will be able to find out. See, what I actually suggest you to do is don't take things in its face value. Okay, it doesn't mean that you have to actually mark it wrong when you see that it is steadily increase or steadily decrease. You don't have to do that. You don't have to blindly do that. You just have to read that and just think for a second whether is there any possibility for that. Later on, we'll have one more question related to it, and then I'll explain how that particular thinking process will take place. Now, if it is something that is related to that of an economic indicator, especially that if something is in percentage terms, okay, note this down. Something if it is in percentage term, that is very low chance that it will steadily decrease or increase. If something is in absolute term, there is even some possibility, some rare possibility, or some better possibility for it to become correct if they mention that it steadily increased or steadily decreased. So if something is in percentage terms, understand that very rare possibility that it will be correct if it is given as steadily increase. In absolute terms, it may change. Clear? So here answer is neither one nor two. Now next is a question that was asked in 2018 related to FRBM. FRBM is also something or these kind of things or these kind of the latest current affairs because it is in 2018 that the new FRBM Act was actually passed. So that was a kind of situation that led to this question. Now in this question, you can see that this is an example of what I refer personally as hybrid type of question. Now, hybrid type of question means you can see that there is current affairs as well as that of inclusion of the static portion. Now go through the statements. Now the first statement mentioned that fiscal responsibility and budget management review committee report, that is NK Singh committee report, has recommended a debt to GDP ratio of 60% for general government by 2023, comprising 40% for the central government and 20% for the state government. Now, there are two things that you have to note. Now, FRBM Act 2018 mentions that this particular 60% target will be met by 2025. But NK Singh committee report have mentioned that it should be met in 2023. Now, if you do not read the question properly, you may sometimes jump to the conclusion that it is 2025 in the act, so this is wrong. You might not have given emphasis to review committee report. So read the question properly, emphasize or give proper emphasis on the terms that is mentioned in the question. Clear? So here it is correct because it is 60%, it is 40 for the central government and 20 for the state government. There is nothing wrong in this particular statement given here. But don't get confused. Don't actually have that particular doubt. Okay, so that is there. Now the second one, the central government has domestic liability of 21% of GDP compared to that of 49% of state government. Now this is contradictory, right? There is no statement consistency because if this statement is right, this will definitely be wrong, right? So you can search for options where 2 is there. You can eliminate there. It is opposite, right? It will always be opposite because the level of debt of central government will be higher than that of the state governments. If you have just went through that particular fiscal responsibility budget management act, FRBM act, you will definitely be, clear about that particular numbers. So that is that. But sometimes some students, what they do is they do not give much importance, they do not give attention to these details, and they jump into the answers and they make it wrong. Don't do that. That will actually sometimes will create a difference in whether you clear prelims or not. So that is very important. Now the third one, look into this particular statement. This is a basic statement. These two are something that is related to that of current affairs, and this one is the basic statement that you actually learn from Lakshmikant. When it comes to central-state relations, when it comes to that of the financial relation between the center and the state, there this particular statement is clearly mentioned that it is mandatory for a state to take the central government's consent for raising any loan if the former owes any outstanding liabilities to the latter. So these kind of questions can also be expected where if given statements are like 3 or 4, out of that 1 or 2 can be static and remaining 2 can be current affairs. So be prepared for every type of question. And it is correct, so answer is 1 and 3. Okay. Now next we are moving to the next portion, that is taxation. Now when it comes to taxation, new changes in tax law, okay, especially you can see a lot of questions during the time of implementation of GST. There was question in 2017 and 2018 related to that of GST. Clear? So that is a kind of question that UPSC asks. Then you can also see some kind of theoretical questions, the conceptual clarity type of questions from the taxation chapter. So that is a kind of a mix. Okay, so you have to also give importance to certain focus areas, such as that of the new terms that is coming related to that of the taxation. There is questions related to or the issues related to anti-dumping, right? You might have heard about inverted duty structure. These were some of the terms that was already there in the news. Give importance to all of these. That will be important. That will be necessary for you to score good marks. Then when it comes to UPSC favorites, that are nothing but the recent tax reforms. As the most recent tax reform was GST, there were multiple questions related to that of GST, right? Now, if suppose in future another major tax reform takes place when it comes to that of direct tax, because reform in direct tax is actually pending since last so many years. Many of the experts have already asked government to carry out some kind of changes or reforms in the direct tax, the manner in which we carry direct tax, etc. So that is also there. Now another focus area that is related to the recent changes made in the corporate tax structure, very important. UPSC will ask a question related to that. You have to, if you haven't already read that, if you haven't already studied that, do study them. It is very important. Clear? So these are some of the type of questions that you can expect. Now, when it comes to that of the taxation, the first question that we are going to deal here is with reference to India's decision to levy an equalization tax of 6% on online advertisement by non-resident entities. Which of the following statement is or are correct? Okay, so in that question, the first is it is introduced as part of Income Tax Act. Now your focus, your attention matters in this type of question. Now what happens to most of the students is, I've seen a lot of students who have ample amount or good amount of content. They might have prepared really well. They might have prepared to the level that even the topper of that year might not have that kind of knowledge. But somehow, unfortunately, they will not be or they are not able to clear prelims. Now that thing happens just because of the fact that they get tensed, they start panicking, and very simple questions and very simple concepts will start going wrong for them. Now that is just because they start getting tense and they will start skipping certain words that is given in the question. They will start, running through that particular words. They will not focus on the words given. They will not pay attention to the details of the question. I have seen n number of aspirants who have went through this particular issue. Now, for that, what you have to understand is, see, if you don't focus for that particular 2 hours, whatever content that you have, whatever materials that you have studied, it is not going to help you. Instead, if you stay calm, if you stay confident, even if you have above average content, you will definitely be able to clear things. That is because when you're calm, when you're confident, when you're composed, you will be able to look into the details. Your eyes will, reach out to those kind of details. Because UPSC usually make questions or statements right or wrong in the details that they give. If your eyes reach that particular detail, which is used by the UPSC to make a statement wrong, you will be able to get good marks. Now here, take an example of Income Tax Act. Now, as you know, these kind of tax reforms are actually passed as part of the Finance Act. Right? It is not as part of the Income Tax Act. There itself, that statement is wrong. Sometimes you don't look into that, okay, it is passed as an act. You just see that it is an act. You don't look into the detail that whether it is Finance Act or whether it is Income Tax Act. You might have studied about equalization levy, but just imagine, even after studying that, if this particular question goes wrong, how will you feel? Just because of a silly mistake where you did not pay attention. So do pay attention. That is the point that I want to put that in your face. Please pay attention to the details in the question. Now the second statement, all the people who have read about the equalization levy, which is also referred to as, informally referred to as Google tax, they know what exactly this particular tax is. Now in the question itself that is given, equalization tax of 6% on online advertisement services offered by non-resident entities, right? So the statement is wrong, it is clear. One more logic that you can use, even if you don't know whether it is Finance Act or Income Tax Act. The tax which is paid on advertisement services will never become part of income tax. Income tax is a direct tax. This is an indirect tax. So how will it be a part of Income Tax Act? That logic can also be used. So your answer is neither one nor two. It says a decrease in tax to GDP ratio of country indicates which of the following. Now this is a tricky question. There was a lot of debate related to the correct answer of this question before UPSC published its official answer key. Now the first statement is slowing economic growth rate. The second statement, less equitable distribution of national income. Select the correct answer. Now, when you think based on the knowledge that you have, a decrease in tax to GDP ratio shows that there is decrease in the growth rate, right? When does the tax revenue start going down? It goes down when the people in the country are not able to earn better income, when the companies are not able to create better profit, when the sales, production, etc. is not taking place, that is why the companies are not able to make much profit. Now, in this situation, the tax ratio to that of GDP will start coming down. And that shows that there is slowing economic growth, right? You have to actually make use of the tax buoyancy concept here. What does tax buoyancy mean? It means the change in tax based on the change in the tax base. So when the tax base starts going down, the tax revenue will start going down. So if there is a reduction in tax to GDP, that simply means there is a reduction in tax base, there is reduction in economic growth. There is also one more, chance for that. That is when the government reduces the tax rate, but you don't have to complicate things, because if it is so, that particular thing will be mentioned here, right? So think in a simple manner. Take it in face value itself. Don't go into that deep, in-depth kind of, analysis where you take multi-dimensional approach. That is going to complicate things, and you will end up making things wrong. Now, second is less equitable distribution of national income. Now, that cannot be told, right? With just this particular, kind of data with us, we cannot surely say it is showing that there is less equitable distribution of national income. This is not the right indicator to understand that. And this indicator will not give any solid evidence for that as well. So the taken statement is wrong. So use your logic here. That is something that you can do. So answer is A. Initially, there was a confusion that both 1 and 2 is wrong, because some people said that it is not possible to understand whether economic growth is going down because of a reduction in tax to GDP ratio. But when you think about in a plain term, okay, in a simple layman term, that is correct. That makes sense. So whenever you check the UPSC answer key, UPSC takes the approach of a layman understanding of economics, not the expert level understanding of economics. The simple, straightforward thinking related to that of the economics is something, or is the way in which UPSC prepares its answer key on its questions. So do take that particular approach when it comes to the prelims examination. Now, these are the two important questions that I have mentioned about GST. 2017 July 1st was the implementation date of GST, right? As a result, in 2017. Now, I'll throw light on some important thing when it comes to that of prelims. It is not just confined to that of the economics. It is also very important to that of other subjects also. UPSC have this habit that they take up a particular subject which was widely discussed, such as that of a very big reform. I'll give you an idea, new education policy, right? It was passed a couple of days ago. So new education policy is a hot topic because we have made a change in our education policy since, the last change was, I guess, in 1986. So the reform was pending since last 34 years, and we have created that particular change. Now, these kind of hot topics, hot issues, UPSC take it up. In the first year, they ask a very basic question related to it. In the second year, they increase that particular, kind of the difficulty level. And if they're asking it for the third time, the difficulty level will be very high. I've seen some patterns in other subjects also similar to this. So here GST in 2017 was very straightforward, very simple, the basic of GST. It will replace multiple taxes. Everyone know that, right? Single market in India. It is something that is discussed widely. So it can be done. The second statement, drastically, rotten tomato, reduce current account deficit. GST does not have anything to do with the current account deficit, right? It has only a slight relation to that of the import and all those things, but then also it is very, very, very slight. It enormously increased the growth. This kind of exaggeration, right? The kind of the terminology that they use. So these two statements are wrong. Answer is one only. Now, when it comes to 2018, they made the question a little bit more difficult. They asked what are the items that actually comes under, or are which of the above items are exempted under GST. Now that requires some in-depth knowledge related to GST, and UPSC gave you enough time also, right? They gave you 1 year to prepare GST. Now this time, when it comes to that of the cereals, you know that cereals, which is a basic thing, right? The grains and cereals, you know that you do not charge any tax on those basic commodities. That comes under 0% slab. right? Those things which is consumed by everyone in the country, the weaker sections, the vulnerable sections, the rich and the poor and the middle class, that's kind of the basic necessity item does not have GST, 0%. So you can actually include one in that particular list. So one will be correct, right? So one is exempted. Now we require other aspects also. So what are the other things that are exempted from the GST? Chicken, eggs cooked, is it exempted from GST? Fish processed and canned, is it exempted? Right? Then we have this newspaper containing advertising materials. Is it exempted from GST? We need to find whether these things are included or not. Now, when it comes to that of the options, you can see here as tricky also, right? Because sometimes you get confused on the fact that, see, when you go to a restaurant and you have eggs, what happened in the bill? They charge 5% GST, right? So you get confused, like, see, I'm actually, if I go to a restaurant and I take boiled eggs, right, cooked eggs, then they charge GST of 5%. So it attracts 5% GST, right? Now there you have to understand that actually when it comes to that of the chicken eggs, whether it is cooked or not, GST is 0%. These are some of the complexities that is included in GST, some kind of things that makes things, kind of confusing in case of GST. When it comes to fish processed and canned, there you do not have you might not have any kind of doubt because canned products, these kind of branded products, they are not something that is of basic necessity or kind of a product that everyone uses, right? So obviously it will attract GST. So one is correct. 3 can be eliminated. So when you eliminate 3, there is 2 options left. 1, 1, 2, and 4. Now, in case of chicken eggs, as I've mentioned, it does not attract. See, I'll give you an information. Okay, here when we try to use logic, because I've actually attempted prelims in 2018. I used the logic that chicken eggs cooked. That means I'm going to, restaurants, and when I have this kind of things, they take like 5% GST. So chicken eggs cooked, it will be actually having GST. So what I did, these are not exempted, these are not exempted. So 2 and 3 are not exempted. Then I had only one option, that is one only, and I did this and it was wrong. But when you go deeper into it, you can see that chicken eggs is actually not included, or it is exempted from GST, as well as the newspaper containing advertisement, it is also exempted from GST, but the advertisement itself actually have GST. The advertisements have GST, but the newspapers do not have any GST. It doesn't matter whether the newspaper contain advertisement or not, but newspapers does not have GST. But the advertisements that is posted on the newspaper, that separately, if you take it, that actually attracts GST. That is how it goes. So the answer is 1, 2, and 4. It's a very tricky and a difficult question at that particular point of time. And still, I guess it's difficult itself. Okay. And I don't think you have to go and study all those items that are exempted from GST, that are included in GST, etc. Okay, so you don't have to actually understand or do that. So that's the thing. So these kind of questions can be expected, which is going to fetch 1 or 2 questions away from you. Next is external sector. Now, when it comes to that of the external sector, again, you have to understand that there are certain important aspects associated with it. Now, when you look into the trend analysis, external sector, as I've already mentioned, most of the questions are current affairs related, right? Most of the easy, direct, basic, conceptual understanding questions are already asked by UPSC. They have already exhausted it because the external sector chapter is very less, or it is very limited in nature. And one more thing that I want to mention here is, when you look into the entire questions that we have discussed so far, you might have seen this particular trend or this particular pattern, which I want you to give attention to. If UPSC is asking questions on the basic concepts, or if a UPSC is asking question on the static basic conceptual portions of economy, they are asking simple questions. Once they exhaust the simple questions, they will be either going towards that of the trend-based questions, or they will be going towards that of the current affairs questions. They do not go deeper into the theoretical part because they do not expect you to be an expert in the economical theory. They expect you to have a layman understanding, not layman like somewhat, kind of. They just want you to have basic understanding of what economic theory is. You can see that particular pattern in the entire 10 years question paper. UPSC once exhausts the basic questions, they are not going deeper into the theoretical portion. Instead, they are going away from the theoretical portion and they start focusing more on the current affairs questions, the scheme-based questions, the trend-based questions, etc. So do keep that in mind. Okay. Now, next you have to understand that the International Economic Organization, such as that of the WTO, IMF related things are important. Now, these kind of questions, it's actually part of external sector as well as it is also part of certain reports. So some of the questions, it is kind of overlapping inside economics itself. It can be included in external sector also. It can be dealt in separately as reports also. So we have actually taken it as separately in the form of reports. Okay, so that's not an issue. Now we'll go forward. Now 2012 question. Balance of payment of a country is a systematic record of very simple questions, right? The basic of what is, balance of payment. It's as simple as that. What is the answer here? It is the economic transaction between government of one country to another. The simple definition, right? See, you can easily eliminate all other options, all import and import transactions of a country during a given period. No, it is not just import and export, right? Goods exported from a country during a year. No, it's also negative, wrong. Capital movement, again wrong. So simple. Answer is C, economic transaction between the government of one country to another. Now the next question is, in terms of economy, the visit by foreign national to witness Commonwealth Game in India. Conceptual question, 2011. Just remember what I've told you already. So if foreign nationals are coming to our country, now it is similar, like 2010 was Commonwealth Games. So this question is inspired, this particular example is inspired from that. So all those people who came for the Commonwealth Games, that means it is import, right? We are importing. They are coming here and they are using our services. So this is services import. We have already discussed that in the class. We have already discussed this kind of example in the class. So it won't be much of an issue for you. Okay, I hope you have understood that particular concept, because whenever foreigners are coming to India and taking our services, that means we are importing services. Whenever our students or tourists go to another country, whether it is for pilgrimage, whether it is for, like tourism purpose, etc., that means we are exporting services. Sorry, I'm really sorry. I just messed it up. We are exporting services. Okay. So whenever it comes to that of some foreign nationals coming to our country, some tourists who are coming to our country, when they are using our services, that means it is export of services. We are exporting services. We are giving them services. Now, whenever the tourists from our country or students from our country goes to another country, that means we are importing services because our people are going there, they are using the services. That is equal to import of services. Clear? So answer is simple, export of services. Clear? Now next is, which of the following constitute capital account? Again, you can draw that particular aspect here. Now, what does capital account mean? It means what? Something that is long-term in nature. That is how capital account in BOP comes in, right? It has various components such as that of the debt, right? That is the capital aspect. We can mention about the investments aspect. So all those things need to be understood. Now, foreign loans means it is long-term in nature. So look into the nature of transaction, whether it is long-term or short-term. Short-term transaction means it is current account. Long-term means it is capital account. So foreign loans means it is long-term in nature. Loans are long-term. Investments are long-term. Private remittances are short-term. They are sending it, that is done. It is short-term in nature. Investments, when they invest it, it stays here for a long period of time, then they take back their investments. Right? Foreign loans, they give that particular loan for a longer period of time, say for 10 years or 15 years, that is long term. Foreign portfolio investment, again, this is investment. Investments are usually long term in nature, right? So as a result, portfolio investments, private remittance, the foreign direct investments and foreign loans are part of capital account. Private remittances are part of revenue, current account because it is short-term transaction. So you have to consider it in short-term, long-term manner. So answer here is 1, 2, and 4. Answer is B. Clear? Now next question, which of the following would include foreign direct investment in India? Okay, again, what is foreign direct investment? You have to understand that foreign direct investment means one is more than 10% of investment. Now this particular number is changing because government is relaxing foreign institutional investment limits in order to attract more investments into the country. So it is actually debatable now, but still we can say that more than 10% investment. Then second is they have management control, right? Technical know-how is bought by them, management, control, technical know-how, right? They build assets, etc. Now, subsidiaries of foreign company in India means they are actually starting their own company. They will be transferring the technology. They will be transferring the know-how. They're involved in the managerial control. They want to create profit. So as a result, they are foreign direct investment. Majority foreign equity holding in Indian companies. If a particular foreign company is holding majority share in Indian company, that means they are interested in growing that particular company. They are not just interested in investing an amount and creating returns out of the investment in the form of capital gains or dividends. Here they are purely, they want to create more profit. They want to expand their business, right? Companies exclusively financed by foreign companies again. Now, portfolio investment. Now, what is the nature of portfolio investment? They're only providing capital. Their main aim is to create capital gains, such as that they invest a particular amount now, after 1 or 2 years, their capital grows, they take back, they earn capital gains and they go back. They are not interested in transferring technology, they are not interested in building assets, they are not interested in expanding the business or earning more profit. The major aim is just investments. They do not actively take part in the operations. Okay, so here 1, 2, and 3 is the answer. Answer is option D. So these kind of concepts, these kind of basic ideas need to be kept in mind, and you have to also note down the year in which these questions are asked. Okay. Now FDI and FII are related to investment in a country. Which one of the following statement best represent an important difference between the two? Now, what is the important difference? Now, FII actually helps in increasing capital availability, and FDI targets specific sectors. See, I've actually left that particular term, as specific sectors. Now we look into all the options here, and then we'll take a call. Okay, so the first option given here is both foreign direct investment and foreign institutional investment. First statement is foreign institutional investment helps bring better management skills and technology. Now that is wrong, because FII do not bring management skills, they do not bring technology. So that statement can be made eliminated very easily. Now FII helps in increasing capital availability in general. while FDI targets specific sector. Okay, there is a slight kind of confusion will be there because the definition or the idea of FDI is not very clear. They just mentioned that FDI only targets specific sector. Okay, we'll leave it like that. Now, FDI flows only into the secondary market in general, sorry, while FII flows only into the secondary market in general, while FDI only targets specific sectors. Now, it is not necessary that FII or these investments are only coming to the secondary market. They can also participate in the primary market, right? Initial issue and all, they can also participate in that. So the statement can also be, or this will be all wrong. Then FII is considered to be more stable than FDI. Never. FII is the kind of investment that get away from a particular economy as soon as there is an economic issue, right? It is the first to leave a country. FDI, as they are building some technology, as they have built assets, they do not tend to escape from an economy as soon as there arises an economic issue, right? So it is the last to leave a country, but FII is the first to leave the country. So as a result, it is wrong. So the option that is left with us now here, what they meant is FDI only targets specific sector means in case of FII, they start investing in various sectors. They provide capital in general, right? But FDI, what they do is, if suppose Walmart is coming, they have this particular sector in which they have expertise. They focus on that particular sector only. Walmart does not invest in various number of companies working in different sectors. Walmart only invest in those companies or those areas where they have expertise, that is retail, right? So that is how this particular point need to be understood. Now, next question is recently which one of the following currency, because it was around 2016 that Chinese renminbi was actually added in the SDR list, special drawing rights list. Okay. Now you have to also understand the basics of what is SDR, what are the different types of currencies that are included under SDR. So do refer to that also because there is a chance that you may ask those kind of questions as well. Now, international liquidity. Now, when it comes to that of 2015, they have already, as I've mentioned, they have exhausted the basic questions. So by 2015, the type of questions started changing and more kind of application rather than the direct, theory. They are more focusing on the application type of thing. So the problem of international liquidity is related to the non-availability of. Now, what do you mean by international liquidity? That means shortage of international currency to carry out international trade. So that is shortage in international liquidity. There is crunch in the availability of international currencies or widely accepted currencies such as that of US dollars, euro, etc. Right? So that itself shows that now the liquidity situation arises when there is non-availability of. Is it goods and services? No. If there is non-availability of goods and services, what happens is internationally the prices of products will start increasing. It does not have anything to do with availability of currency or liquidity as such. Gold and silver, it is not as liquid as considering the case of currency. So you can eliminate that as well. Now, the third option is dollar and other hard currencies. That is the correct answer, right? Liquidity means you have to have currency. You have to have that medium of exchange to carry out trade. Now, the last previous question was related to SDR. Why was SDR actually introduced? The very purpose of introducing SDR by IMF was the fact that by 1960s, there was heavy shortage in case of the dollar availability. As a result, international trade started getting affected. So that is why, in order to increase international liquidity, IMF created SDR, which can act as a kind of a currency. Now, in case of SDR, also you have to understand that at present, due to wider availability of these kind of currencies, especially dollars and other hard currencies, there is minimal requirement of SDR as such, but it is still being continued. Clear? So gold and silver is not correct. So answer is dollars and other hard currencies. The next question is, which of the following is issued by registered foreign portfolio investors to overseas investors who want to be part of the Indian stock market without registering themselves directly? It is a direct question. Participatory note was lately in use, right? It was part of current affairs and it comes up in use every now and then. So I guess this is certain type of question that might have been made correct by almost all the candidates, all the aspirants, right? So next is consider the following actions which the government can take. First one is devaluing the domestic currency. Second one, reduction in export subsidy. Third one, adopting suitable policies which attract greater FDI and more funds from FII. Now here you can understand that the question is which can help in reducing current account deficit. Now you have to understand what exactly is current account deficit. Okay, so current account means it includes balance of trade, it includes balance of invisibles, it includes, yeah, these two things are the most important aspects of current account, right? Balance of trade and balance of invisibles. So the third statement can be eliminated very easily. You don't have to look into other aspects. When you see greater FDI and FII, FDI and FII are investments and that belongs to the capital account. If you know this basic knowledge, 3 can be eliminated and you are left with option 1 and 2. Now, there can be a doubt on how reduction in export subsidy help in reducing current account deficit. Because if there is higher levels of export subsidy, we expect that our entrepreneurs or our companies will start exporting more, right? Because they have better export subsidies. But somehow in the UPSC official answer key, they have mentioned that 1 and 2 is correct. Sometimes it may be a kind of, a wrong question, a wrong option, but they took 1 and 2 as right in the official answer key because there are no other options such as that of 1 only. Maybe it is because of that they took the best, option. Okay, so these kind of mistakes can also be there from the side of UPSC. I'll also point out another important question where similar kind of thing can be seen. Okay, so leave it aside. So even if you know it or not, or even if it is confusing or not, with a very simple logic, with a very simple elimination technique, you can get to the right answer. So pay attention to these kind of details, these kind of things. Now next is convertibility of rupee implies. Again, what is convertibility? Very simple logic, very simple idea that everyone study as part of the basic economics. It is freely permitting conversion of rupee to other currency and vice versa, right? See, these kind of direct questions, you don't have to look into the other statements also because it's very easy. It's like straightforward, right? As soon as you see this option, you will be searching for that particular option where you see that particular term conversion of rupee. Now, as soon as you see this conversion of rupee, you will be able to do that. Now, see, one more thing that I want to point out here is, as soon as you see this conversion of rupee, don't jump to the answer. Read the option which is left for you to read as well. Okay, because sometimes in B and C, it may be similar and they might have tweaked some small details, right? So that can also be there. So if suppose you are looking for a definition, you know that you know the answer. And in the very first statement, you see what you require, that particular word is there. Don't jump into answer and mark A, because sometimes there can be similar statement with minor changes and maybe that will be right. Okay, it has actually happened also. So don't jump to the answer, read all the options and only after that you go to the particular right answer. Now next is, in the context of India, which of the following factors are contributors or to reducing the risk of currency crisis? Now this is the latest question. Again, this is a kind of a application question. Okay, if you know the basics, if you have the conceptual clarity, you will be able to do that. Foreign currency earnings of India's IT sector. Now, Does it allow us to reduce the currency crisis? Now, we have to first understand what is currency crisis. What is it? Currency crisis happen when our currency is actually depreciating. It is depreciating at a higher levels of amount or higher proportions. Like from 70, it reaches to 100. Then we can say that like the conversion between $1 to rupee from 70, if it reaches to 100 in a very short period of time, then we can say that we are going through a currency crisis. Now, what are the factors that help us to reduce these currency prices? So here you have to think from the perspective that if we are earning foreign exchange, the currency crisis will be less. Because when we earn foreign exchange, what happens is when we convert them, our rupee will appreciate, right? So whatever factors that help the rupee to appreciate will be the answer in these three statements. I hope you have understood that. Currency crisis means rupee depreciating at a very high level. So whatever things that help us to help us in the appreciation of rupee, right? When does rupee appreciate? When we earn foreign exchange, rupee will start appreciating. So that is there. So foreign earnings of India's IT sector. Now that means we are earning, right? We are earning foreign exchange. That means the rupee will appreciate. Appreciation of rupee will take place. So that will be right. Increasing the government expenditure. Now here, does it directly have any relation with our currency? It doesn't directly have a relation, but indirectly also, when you look into that aspect also, that particular statement will be wrong. Why? Because when there is higher government expenditure, what will happen? There will be higher levels of inflation in the economy. When there is higher levels of inflation, then also rupee will depreciate, right? We have studied that in the inflation chapter. That is, when there is high level of inflation, the rupee or the currency will depreciate. Now, third one, remittances from Indians abroad. That means we are again earning foreign exchange. That will also lead to earning of foreign exchange. That will also lead to appreciation of Indian rupee. So 1 and 3 is the correct answer. Clear? So think from the basics. Even if the application question is given to you, you go to the basics. You create a framework of the basics in your mind. Understand like how rupee crisis or currency crisis happen. It happens when rupee depreciate. So whatever factors that help to reduce rupee crisis or currency crisis means things that help the rupee to have appreciation. And when will rupee have appreciation? When we earn foreign exchange. So see to it that you identify the points that will help in earning foreign exchange. That's it. Now next is which one of the following is not the most likely measure the government or RBI takes to stop the slide of Indian rupee. So here you have to understand that what are the measure, which of the following measure is not taken. That means which among the following measure will further lead to slide of Indian rupee? That is what question is asking, right? The way the question is framed is a bit difficult. It is difficult to understand. So the basic idea of question is which among the following, in a different manner, you can say that the question is asking which among the following will lead or will create a further slide in rupee. Okay. So curbing imports of non-essential goods and promoting exports. That is one thing. Okay. Will it reduce slide of Indian rupee? Will it reduce depreciation of rupee? Of course, it will reduce. If you reduce imports, that means the foreign exchange outflow will reduce, right? As a result, depreciation will also come down. When you import more, you are losing a lot of foreign exchange, right? So imports will lead to reduction or depreciation of rupee. Next is encouraging Indian borrowers to issue rupee denominated masala bond. Same thing. When we issue rupee denominated masala bond, what happened? There is no exchange risk, right? So that will also be something that helps us to stop the slide of Indian rupee. Because even though we are raising from a foreign market, we are actually denominating it in Indian rupee. So the risk will be less. Easing conditions relating to external commercial borrowing. Now again, that is also correct, because when our companies take loan from other countries, they are bringing that particular foreign exchange to the country. Even though it is debt, they are bringing foreign exchange, right? So that will help reduce slide of Indian rupee. That will help in reducing depreciation of Indian rupee, because when they take loan from foreign countries, they actually, when they bring it to our country, they will be converting it into Indian rupee. Thereby, our kind of depreciation will be less. Next is following an expansionary monetary policy. Now, following expansionary monetary policy is something that leads to inflation and will lead to depreciation of currency. Clear? So that will not be done by the government. So answer is following an expansionary monetary policy, because that will lead to slide of Indian rupee. Clear? So understand the concepts. These are the questions that was asked in 2019, and these are some of the questions that check your application level. Okay. Now another question from 2019 from external sector. You can see that there are a lot of questions from external sector in 2019. There are almost like 4 questions. Most of India's external debt is owed by government entities. I've already mentioned it that the government debt is comparatively very low. Now this is where referring previous UPSC question paper becomes important. If you have referred to previous UPSC question papers, you will get a lot of insights that can be helpful for your upcoming prelims as well. Because earlier we have seen a question from around 2016 or 15, something like that, where it was mentioning about the external debt. Now, when you see that kind of thing, such as that of external debt from a previous question paper, you have to actually refer it to it. Because sometimes you can see that some of the options in the previous year question papers will come as a question in the upcoming prelims. So earlier, external debt was actually part of an option. So all these options have the possibility of turning out to become questions in the upcoming years. So that is also necessary. Clear? So India's external debt is owed by government entities. There again, you know that it is a kind of a knowledge that is known to all those people who seriously prepare for this examination, that India's external debt is less. Now, all of India's external debt is denominated in US dollars. All of India's rotten tomato, you can use that particular technique also. So this will also again be wrong. So answer is neither 1 nor 2. So that is the answer. Clear? Now next is considering the following statements. Purchasing power parity. Exchange rates are calculated prices of same basket of goods and services in different countries. Now that is correct. In terms of PPP dollars, India is the 6th largest economy in the world. Now is that correct? No, India is the 3rd largest. Now this is a simple basic question. I am not going to explain it more, because I know already most of you guys are already know that particular concept. So answer is 1 only. Purchasing power parity is a very basic concept. You have to understand that. Exchange rates are calculated, all those things. Okay, here it is 3rd largest. Now, when it comes to that of these kind of questions, you have to also understand that it can be considered as a trend-based question or a trend kind of question, because they're asking certain trend. Now, recently, India become the 5th largest country in the world when it comes to GDP in nominal terms. Okay, not in PPP terms, GDP in nominal terms in dollars. So India is the fifth largest. So that particular change prompted UPSC to ask a question related to that of PPP and India's position in PPP. So UPSC usually sometimes what they do is they take kind of inspiration from the current affairs news and they try to frame questions based on that. Okay. Now, the term-based questions related to international trade. So, international trade is another important part when it comes to that of the external sector. When it comes to international trade, you have to understand that the kind of questions they ask is related to that of the domestic content requirement. That was there in the news in the entire year of 2016 and 17 because US actually moved to WTO because India went for domestic content requirement under the National Solar Mission. Okay, so this is the current affairs question that was asked by UPSC, and you will directly get the answer: solar power production. That is how that particular term became, famous when it comes to that of the external sector. The next is import cover. So, what is import cover? Okay, these kind of questions are also important. You can just get it from the question itself. So we look into that particular statements given here. It is the ratio of value of imports to the gross domestic product of a country. Now, will that be referred to as import cover? No, right? Okay. Then it is the total value of imports of a country in a year. Now, what is cover? Cover means uh, something that we can, we say that, yeah, I'll be able to cover it up, right? Or I'm in a position to manage that. So that is something that we refer it to as cover. Okay. Will you be able to cover it means will you be able to manage it, right? So that is how that word cover is used by us. So import cover here means it is nothing but something that is consistent with which is asked, right? It is the ratio between the value of exports and the imports between two countries. Now that we cannot say it as cover, right? It is not something that manages things. Now here becomes the final option is very important here. It is the number of months of imports that could be paid for by a country's international reserves. Now that means we are the level at which we will be able to manage our imports. Now that makes sense with the word given here, right? So even if you are not familiar with the terms used by UPSC, if you pay attention and if you closely start reading that particular statements, you will be able to understand what it is. You will be able to get the correct idea related to what UPSC have actually meant by that. So here it is simple. So import cover means the amount that we have to cover or manage the imports of our country, right? So it is the number of months of imports that could be paid for by countries, the national reserves. So this is how you will be able to do it. So don't leave questions if suppose the term that is mentioned there is not known to you. If you use some logic, if you pay attention, you will definitely be able to do it. Now next is India enacted the Geographical Indications of Goods Act 1999 in order to comply with the obligation to. So geographical indication, it comes under very simple, right? It is to comply with the obligations of WTO. It's as simple as that. Now, I don't have to explain these things because these kind of questions are very basic because geographical indications are frequently in use and we know what geographical indication means, right? How it came up, how is it related to that of, trade-related intellectual property? How is it different to that of a patent and other kinds of intellectual property? What is the significance? All these basics are known to all. And these kind of basics cannot be left by you as well. The next is the term that is base erosion and profit shifting. Now, this is a term-based question. Now, as you can see, in case of external sector, when you look back to the questions that we have discussed already, you can actually divide into different levels or different groups. Okay, the first set of questions that we have discussed here is, okay, I'll go back and I'll do that. Okay, we have discussed questions related to balance of payment. We have discussed the fundamentals of it, right? As well as the trend associated with BOP. So that was the first aspect that we covered. Now going forward, what we did, these are some of the important components of BOP, right? Current account, capital account, and all those things. Then we slowly shifted towards that of currency. Now here you can see SDR, type of a currency, liquidity, it is related to currency. Now here it is something related to that of, raising money. We leave it. Okay. Now here again, the currency aspect. Here again, the currency aspect, right? All these questions that you can see here are of currency aspect, right? Then we have also seen some trends based question. Okay, these trends are related to that of, one is external debt, another one is related to that of the PPP and the position of India. And now here we are going to discuss about international trade. Okay, so when you divide that into different groups, you can see that when it comes to external sector, some of the questions that UPSC asks, our first group is related to that of BOP. The second group is related to that of the currency aspect. The third group is related to that of certain trends. And finally, UPSC is also asking related to that of the international trade, right? So now, base erosion and profit shifting is actually something that we study in case of the malpractices done by MNCs in order to reduce their tax liability. It is something that we discuss under the tax avoidance, right? So, based on that, the space erosion and profit shifting was there in the news because G20 countries, right, they wanted to take some action against these kind of malpractices by the companies, whereby the developing countries are losing much of their tax revenue. So here the answer is straightforward. It is a very simple question: curbing the tax evasion by multinational companies, right? So if you have read about that in the newspaper, if you are for someone who follows newspaper quite frequently, if you are someone who updates current affairs from different types of articles and materials, you will be easily be able to do this particular question, right? So with that, we have covered the external sector as well as we have covered the macroeconomics portion. Yeah.